The alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m. like it had every weekday for the past 8 years, but this morning was different. I reached over to hit the snooze button, and my arm felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The autumn rain drummed against our bedroom window in our suburban Minneapolis home, creating a rhythm that usually comforted me. Today it sounded ominous. "Come on, Lily, we're going to be late," David called from the bathroom, his voice echoing off the tiles as he brushed his teeth. The sound of running water mixed with the hiss of the coffee maker downstairs, creating the familiar symphony of our morning routine. I tried to sit up, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't just the usual Monday morning sluggishness I'd been complaining about for weeks. This was something else entirely. My muscles felt disconnected from my brain, like trying to move through thick honey. "David," I called out, my voice weaker than I intended. "I think something's wrong." He appeared in the doorway, straightening his navy tie, his sandy hair still damp from the shower. At 34, David worked as an insurance adjuster, a job that had trained him to look for logical explanations and dismiss what seemed unlikely. His blue eyes, usually warm and understanding, showed a flicker of impatience. "You've been saying that for months, Lil. You're just tired. You've been working too hard at the clinic." He grabbed his wallet from the dresser, the same dismissive tone he'd been using lately whenever I mentioned feeling off. I worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center downtown, helping people regain their strength after injuries and surgeries. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days helping others move while my own body was betraying me. "This is different," I insisted, attempting again to swing my legs out of bed. They felt heavy, unresponsive. I can't feel my legs properly." David paused, his hand on the bedroom door handle. For a moment, his expression softened, and I saw a glimpse of the man who used to rush home early when I had a headache, who would make me soup when I caught a cold. "Look, maybe you should take a sick day. Get some rest. You'll feel better tomorrow." He glanced at his watch. "I really have to go. The Henderson Claim meeting is at 9, and if I'm late..." His voice trailed off as he noticed my struggle to even shift position in bed. The October morning light filtering through our cream curtains illuminated my pale face and the way my hands trembled as I gripped the bedsheets. "Lily!" His voice held a note of uncertainty now. "I think I need to see a doctor," I whispered, the words carrying more weight than I'd intended. In our 8 years of marriage, I'd rarely asked for help, rarely complained about anything serious. I was the strong one, the one who took care of everyone else. David's jaw tightened. He was already running calculations in his head, the cost of a doctor's visit, the time off work, the inconvenience of changing plans. Our insurance had a high deductible, and money had been tight since he'd taken the pay cut 6 months ago. "Can't it wait until the weekend? Dr. Morrison's office probably won't even see you without an appointment anyway." The rain grew heavier outside, matching the storm building in my chest. I watched my husband of 8 years choose a schedule over my plea for help, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. "Fine," I said quietly. "Go to work." After he left, the house fell silent except for the rain and the distant hum of traffic on Highway 35. I lay there for an hour, staring at the ceiling, trying to will my legs to move normally. When I finally managed to get up, I had to grip the wall to walk to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My usually bright green eyes looked dulled, surrounded by dark circles. My auburn hair, which I'd always kept neat for work, hung limp around my shoulders. I looked like a ghost of the woman who used to run 5 miles every morning. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in my entire career. My supervisor, Janet, sounded concerned but understanding. "Take care of yourself, Lily. The patients will still be here when you get back." But as I hung up the phone, sitting on the edge of our bed in my pajamas at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, I wondered if I would get back. Something was very wrong, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly alone. The house seemed to echo with David's dismissive words. "You're just tired." But I knew my own body, and this wasn't fatigue. This was something else, something that made my blood run cold with possibility. I picked up my phone to call Dr. Morrison's office, my hands shaking as I dialed. Whatever was happening to me, I couldn't wait for the weekend. I couldn't wait for David to believe me. I had to believe in myself. Dr. Morrison's office smelled like antiseptic and fear. I'd managed to drive myself there, though gripping the steering wheel had been more difficult than it should have been. The 45-year-old physician had been our family doctor for 6 years, and I'd always appreciated his thorough approach and kind bedside manner. "Tell me what's been happening, Lily," he said, settling into his chair across from the examination table where I sat in a thin hospital gown. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his brown eyes held the patience that comes from years of listening to patients' concerns. I described the weakness, the strange sensation in my legs, the fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. As I spoke, I watched his expression grow more serious. He asked detailed questions about when it started, how it progressed, whether I'd noticed any other symptoms. "I'd like to run some tests," he said finally. "Blood work, some neurological assessments. Has your husband noticed these changes?" The question hit harder than I expected. "He thinks I'm just tired from work." Dr. Morrison nodded, making notes in my chart. "Sometimes those closest to us have the hardest time seeing changes because they happen gradually. Let's focus on getting you some answers." The blood draw and initial tests took most of the afternoon. By the time I drove home, the autumn sun was setting behind the maple trees lining our street, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Our house, a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters, looked warm and inviting with the porch light on. David's car was already in the driveway. I found him in the kitchen, reheating leftover pasta, still wearing his work clothes. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. "How was your day off?" he asked without looking up from the microwave. "I went to see Dr. Morrison." That got his attention. He turned around, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that might have been annoyance. "Lily, we talked about this. Those doctor visits add up, especially with our deductible." "Something is wrong with me, David." My voice was steadier than I felt. "Really wrong." He sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "You've been stressed about work, about your mom's situation in Oregon, about money. Stress does things to your body. You don't need expensive tests to tell you that." My mother had been struggling with early-stage dementia, and the distance between Minnesota and Portland made everything harder. David was right about the stress, but he was wrong about everything else. "He's running some tests. We should have results in a few days. How much is this going to cost us?" David's voice had that edge it got when he was calculating expenses. "We're already behind on the mortgage payment because of your reduced hours last month." I had reduced my hours because I'd been too exhausted to maintain my usual patient load, but I hadn't told him how bad it really was. Now I realized my silence had been interpreted as choice rather than necessity. "My health is more important than money," I said quietly. Easy to say when you're not the one trying to make ends meet. The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. That night, I lay awake listening to David's steady breathing beside me, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in our marriage. The weakness in my legs had progressed to my arms, and I found myself struggling to turn the pages of the book I was trying to read. 3 days later, Dr. Morrison called while I was at work. I stepped into an empty therapy room to take the call, watching through the window as patients worked with other therapists, rebuilding their strength and mobility. "Lily, I need you to come in this afternoon. Can you bring David with you?" My heart stopped. "What did you find?" "I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you both be here at 4? I called David at work, my hands trembling as I dialed. "Dr. Morrison wants to see us both at 4. There was a long pause. "Lily, I can't just leave work every time you have a doctor's appointment." "He asked for both of us, David. Please." Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he agreed, though not without sighing heavily first. The waiting room felt different this time. The cheerful magazines and soft music seemed incongruous with the dread building in my chest. David sat beside me, checking his phone and tapping his foot impatiently. Every few minutes, he'd glance at his watch and shake his head. "This better be important," he muttered. I had to reschedule 3 client meetings. When Dr. Morrison called us into his office, his serious expression told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. David finally looked up from his phone, registering the gravity of the moment. "Lily, your test results show some concerning patterns. I'm referring you to a neurologist for further evaluation, but I want to prepare you for what we might be dealing with." The world seemed to slow down as he explained the possibilities, the need for more specialized testing, the importance of acting quickly. David's face went pale, and for the first time in months, he reached for my hand. "How serious are we talking?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Morrison's answer changed everything. "Very serious, David. Very serious indeed." As we left the office, David was quiet, his earlier impatience replaced by something that looked like fear. But it was too late for me to feel relief at his newfound concern. The damage to our relationship had been building for months, and now we faced something that would test everything we thought we knew about our marriage. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my phone buzzing with appointment reminders and the steady hum of traffic. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, wondering how many more times I'd be able to make this journey, wondering if the man beside me would be there for what came next. Dr. Patricia Williams specialized in neurology at Methodist Hospital downtown, and her office walls were lined with diplomas and certificates that should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to face. The appointment was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a Thursday, early enough that David could still make it to work afterward, a detail that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The October morning was crisp, with frost covering our car windshield. David scraped it off mechanically while I struggled to walk the short distance from our front door to the passenger seat. What had started as weakness in my legs had progressed to a noticeable tremor in my hands and difficulty with coordination. "You okay?" David asked as he helped me with the seatbelt, his voice gentler than it had been in weeks. Dr. Morrison's serious tone had shaken him, and I could see the fear beginning to crack through his practical exterior. "I'm scared," I admitted, watching my breath fog in the cold air. David reached over and squeezed my hand. His was warm and steady. Mine felt cold and fragile. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." The neurological examination was comprehensive and exhausting. Dr. Williams was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind but direct brown eyes. She tested my reflexes, my coordination, my strength. She asked me to walk in a straight line, touch my nose with my finger, follow her pen with my eyes. With each test, I could see her mental checklist forming. David sat in the corner, watching intently as his wife failed task after task that should have been simple. "I'd like to schedule an MRI and some additional blood work," Dr. Williams said finally. "There are several possibilities we need to rule out." "What kind of possibilities?" David's voice was tight. Dr. Williams looked at both of us carefully. "Multiple sclerosis, ALS, various autoimmune conditions. I don't want to speculate until we have more information." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I'd worked with patients who had these conditions. I knew what they meant, what they looked like in their advanced stages. "How long before we know?" I asked. "The MRI is scheduled for next Tuesday. We should have results by the end of the week." The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. David kept glancing at me, as if seeing me differently now that my symptoms had a doctor's serious attention. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly as we pulled into our driveway. "For what?" "For not believing you. For thinking you were just, I don't know, making it bigger than it was." I wanted to feel relief at his apology, but all I felt was exhausted. "I know my own body, David. I've always known my own body." That evening, David called his mother in Wisconsin to cancel our planned visit for Thanksgiving. I listened from the kitchen as he explained that I was having some health issues, that we needed to stay close to home. His voice cracked slightly when she asked if everything was okay. "We don't know yet, Mom. We're running some tests." The MRI was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. The machine was loud and claustrophobic, and lying still for 45 minutes gave me too much time to think. I tried to focus on positive outcomes, on the possibility that this was something treatable, something temporary. David waited in the lobby, probably calculating how much time he could still salvage from his workday. Dr. Williams called us back to her office on Friday afternoon. This time, she had films to show us, images of my brain and spinal cord displayed on a large monitor. To me, they looked like abstract art. To her, they told a story I wasn't ready to hear. "Lily, I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The room seemed to shrink around us. David moved his chair closer to mine, and I felt his hand find mine again. "You have multiple sclerosis. Based on the lesions I can see here," she pointed to several bright spots on the scans, "and the progression of your symptoms, I'd classify this as secondary progressive MS." The words hit me like physical blows. I'd worked with MS patients. I knew what secondary progressive meant. I knew what came next. How long do I have before? I couldn't finish the sentence. Every case is different, but typically, patients with this form of MS experience a steady decline in function. We're talking about years, not months, but the progression varies significantly from person to person. David's hand tightened around mine. What are the treatment options? Dr. Williams explained the medications, the physical therapy, the lifestyle changes that might slow the progression. But I heard the subtext. This was about managing decline, not about getting better. I'd like to start you on a disease-modifying therapy immediately. We'll also set you up with a physical therapist who specializes in MS, and I'd recommend connecting with a support group. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, a physical therapist, would now need physical therapy myself. As we left the hospital, the autumn afternoon felt different. The same sun shone on the same trees, but I was seeing it all through the lens of limited time, of a future that had suddenly become much smaller and more uncertain. "Lily," David said as we sat in the hospital parking garage, neither of us ready to drive home yet. "I'm going to be here for this. For all of it." I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw the fear and guilt and love all mixed together in his expression. 6 months ago, his promise would have meant everything to me. Now, after months of dismissal and doubt, I wondered if it was too little, too late. "Are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because when I needed you to believe me, you weren't here." The question hung between us as we finally drove home, both of us knowing that my diagnosis was just the beginning of the hardest conversation our marriage had ever faced. 3 months after my diagnosis, our house had transformed into something between a home and a medical facility. The dining room now contained a hospital bed that David had insisted on renting, though I wasn't ready to admit I needed it yet. Pill organizers lined the kitchen counter like small plastic soldiers, each compartment a reminder of the battle I was fighting inside my own body. It was January now, and the Minnesota winter had settled over our neighborhood with its characteristic brutality. Snow piled against our windows, and the bare maple trees looked like skeletal hands reaching toward a gray sky. The cold made my symptoms worse, something Dr. Williams had warned me about, and some mornings I couldn't feel my fingers well enough to button my shirts. David had changed in ways I hadn't expected. The man who used to rush off to work without a second glance now set 3 alarms to make sure he was awake early enough to help me shower and dress. He'd rearranged his schedule to drive me to my twice-weekly physical therapy appointments and had even taken notes during my meetings with Dr. Williams. But change is complicated, and forgiveness doesn't happen on a schedule. I made an appointment with Jennifer Rodriguez. I told him over breakfast on a Wednesday morning. Jennifer was a counselor who specialized in chronic illness and relationships. I'd found her through the MS support group that had become my lifeline over the past few months. David looked up from his oatmeal, his spoon suspended halfway to his mouth. "Do you think we need that?" The question revealed how much work we still had to do. "I think I need it," I said carefully. "Whether we need it is up to you." He set down his spoon and reached across the table to touch my hand. My grip wasn't strong enough to squeeze back anymore, but I didn't pull away. "I'll go," he said quietly. "I want to go." The MS support group met every Thursday evening in the basement of St. Michael's Lutheran Church on Grand Avenue. The first time I'd walked down those stairs, using the handrail more heavily than I wanted to admit, I'd been terrified. Seeing my future in the faces of other people, some in wheelchairs, some with walking aids, some who looked perfectly healthy but moved with the careful deliberation I was beginning to recognize had been overwhelming. But I'd also found something unexpected: laughter. Margaret, a retired teacher who'd been living with MS for 15 years, had a wicked sense of humor about the absurdities of chronic illness. "Yesterday I tried to unlock my house with my car keys for 10 minutes, she'd shared the week before. Then I realized I was standing in front of my neighbor's door. The group had taught me that you could be afraid and brave at the same time, that you could grieve your old life while building a new one." "How's David handling everything?" asked Tom, a 42-year-old accountant whose wife had left him 6 months after his diagnosis 3 years earlier. It was a question I'd been avoiding, even in the safe space where honesty was the price of admission. "He's trying," I said finally, "but I'm still angry." Margaret nodded knowingly. "Anger is part of it. For both of you. He's grieving too, you know. The life you both planned, the future you thought you had. But I needed him to believe me before there was proof, I said, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. I needed him to trust that I knew my own body. And that's valid, said Carol, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s whose husband had become her primary caregiver. But some people need to see the monster before they can fight it. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. The conversation stayed with me as David and I sat in Jennifer Rodriguez's office the following week. Her space was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and tissues strategically placed on every surface. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of presence that made you want to tell the truth. "What brought you both here today?" she asked, settling into her chair with a notepad. I looked at David, giving him the chance to speak first. He cleared his throat and looked down at his hands. "I failed my wife when she needed me most," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was telling me something was wrong for months, and I didn't listen. I thought I knew better. I thought she was just stressed or tired or I don't know, making it bigger than it was. And how does that feel now?" Jennifer asked gently. "Like I'm the worst husband in the world." David's voice broke slightly. "She has MS, and instead of supporting her, I made her fight alone. I felt tears building behind my eyes, but I also felt something else, the beginning of space for his pain alongside my own. Lily, what's it like to hear David say that?" I took a shaky breath. It helps that he sees it now, but I'm still angry. I'm angry that I had to get a diagnosis for him to believe me. I'm angry that I spent months feeling crazy and alone. And I'm angry that I'm sick, and that's not his fault, but the anger has to go somewhere. Jennifer nodded. Anger is information. It tells us when our boundaries have been crossed, when our needs haven't been met. "What do you need now, Lily?" "I need to know that he won't leave when this gets harder. Because it's going to get harder." David turned to look at me fully. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I gave you reason to doubt that, but I'm not going anywhere. How can I trust that?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I have to show you day by day." Over the following weeks, David did show me. He researched MS treatments and support resources. He modified our bathroom to make it safer for me to navigate. He started coming to the support group meetings, sitting quietly in the circle, learning the language of chronic illness and adaptation. One evening in February, as we sat watching the snow fall outside our living room window, he asked, "What do you miss most?" I thought about it carefully. Running. I used to run 5 miles every morning, and it cleared my head, made me feel strong. "What do you feel strong doing now?" It was a good question, one I hadn't really considered. I like the support group. I like helping other people who are newly diagnosed. It makes me feel useful. "Maybe that's your new kind of running," he said quietly. He was right. The following month, I started co-facilitating a support group for people with recent MS diagnoses. Using my background in physical therapy, I could help people understand their body's new limitations while finding ways to work within them. David started attending a separate group for caregivers and partners. He learned that his initial reaction, the dismissal and denial, was common, though not excusable. He learned strategies for supporting me without overwhelming me, for managing his own fear and grief. Our marriage wasn't the same as it had been before. How could it be? But it was becoming something different, something that accommodated both my illness and our imperfect humanity. One morning in early spring, as I struggled to button my cardigan and David stepped in to help without making a big deal of it, I realized something had shifted. The anger was still there. It might always be there in some form, but it had made room for other things. Gratitude for the support I had now. Hope for the life we were building together. Love that had been tested and was still standing, scarred but stronger. "Thank you," I said as he finished with the buttons. "For what?" "For learning to see me," I said, "even when it took you too long." He kissed my forehead gently. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Outside, the maple trees were beginning to bud, and I could hear birds singing for the first time in months. Spring was coming, and with it, the possibility of new growth, even in the spaces where old dreams had died. I was still sick. David was still learning. We were both still afraid of what came next. But we were learning to be afraid together, and that made all the difference.